Hello, everyone, and welcome back to All the Young Dudes by Miss King Bean 89. I hope you enjoyed this chapter. Chapter 8, First Year, Secrets. Tuesday, 5th October, 1971. The next full moon passed much as the first had. This time, the wolf had certainly grown restless, because Ramus awoke with a number of deep scratches. They heal fast with a bit of antiseptic, he advised Madame Pomfrey, who fussed over him in the chill of the morning. And faster still with magic, she smiled, with a flourish of her wand. The cuts closed almost instantly. Ramus stared, amazed. "Can you get rid of the scars too?" he asked, eagerly. She shook her head sadly. "No, Ramus, not these ones, I'm sorry." "It's okay," he sighed, dressing for school. This time he'd brought his change of clothes with him and left them in the tunnel just outside of the shack to avoid having to go back to the tower this time. He'd meet the other boys in their first lesson and let them wonder where he'd been. "You don't have to go to school today," Madame Pomfrey was saying. "Not when you're too tired. I can write you a note." "I want to go," he replied. "It's not that bad, honestly." Pomfrey looked at him with serious eyes. "Not that bad for now. I'm afraid the transformations may start to take their toll as you grow up." "Have you looked after the other kids like me, then?" He'd been wanting to ask for ages, but wasn't sure how. "No, dear. You're the first Hogwarts student that I know of who's been bitten." "Who's been bitten," she accepted gratefully. "But I hope I know what I'm doing. I've done plenty of reading on the subject." "You mean there are books about people like me?" "Well, yes." She sounded surprised. She sat down on the bed as he finished dressing. "You could borrow one of them if you like." He thought about it, then shook his head. They had Transfiguration first thing, but McGonagall didn't give him detention for not bringing his homework. She had obviously decided to be more lenient around the full moon. She did make him promise to bring it with him next time, and he agreed, hoping he sounded sincere. James, Sirius, and Peter spent half of the lesson trying to get his attention, but he steadfastly ignored them until McGonagall threatened to separate all four of them. In the halls, on their way to Charms, Ramus knew there was no escape. It was a good 5-minute walk. "So, where were you?" Sirius blurted out, walking on his left-hand side. "Nowhere," he replied, trying to hurry up. "Oh, go on," James pleaded, coming up on his right side. "Tell us. Was it the same place you went last month?" "Maybe." "Were you in detention again?" asked Peter, struggling to keep up. Remus cursed himself for not having thought of that. Detention would be a perfect cover. "Nope." "Then where?" "Watch it, Half-Blood." Remus was too busy evading questions to look where he was going and smacked right into Snape, who was coming around the corner. Already wound up, Remus squared his shoulders and attempted to push past roughly. "Watch yourself, Snivellus." Snape didn't move and pushed him aside. Mulciber appeared at his left shoulder, looming menacingly over the smaller boys. "I know it was you that broke into our dorms the other night," he hissed. "All of you." "Yeah? Prove it." James smirked, folding his arms. Snape's lips curled. "I can't yet, but I will. I'm getting you back too, I promise." "We're quaking in our boots," Sirius replied, leaning against the wall as if he was bored. "Now would you kindly move it?" "Your idea, was it, Black?" Snape drawled. "Or yours, Potter?" "Had to be one of you. Pettigrew doesn't have the guts, and dear Lupin here clearly hasn't got the brains." Remus clenched his fist. he could see Snape's hand on his wand. Severus probably knew all sorts of curses and hexes. James had taught Remus one or two, but he was too blind with rage to remember any of them now. "Move along now, gentlemen," a sharp voice suddenly rang out over the corridor. It was Professor Flitwick, stepping out of his classroom to see what the holdup was. "Severus, you're clogging up the hallways, and you four are supposed to be in my class. Come on." Remus felt overheated and agitated for the rest of Charms, which was usually his favorite lesson. It relied more on practical work and his wand than reading or writing, and he often did better than even James and Sirius, finding it difficult to calm down. He kept shooting his cushions across the room like missiles rather than guiding them carefully through the hoops Flitwick had hung from the ceiling. They'd been working on levitation charms for a few weeks now, and Peter was the only one struggling. In Remus's opinion, Peter's problem was the lack of imagination. James and Sirius were both uneerily confident, and he'd found that confidence was all you needed to complete most basic spells. Remus himself generally felt able to complete any task if it looked simple enough. Peter, on the other hand, worried about everything. He read and reread his textbooks, trying to copy the most complicated diagrams rather than just copy what Flitwick showed them. "I expect you all to be able to levitate this book by the end of the week," Flitwick said at the end of the lesson. The book was enormous, about half the size of the tiny professor, and looked as though a fully grown man might have trouble carrying it very far. "So come prepared for a quick test of your abilities." Peter groaned as they collected their things to leave. Remus had managed to calm down by lunchtime, but still had trouble controlling his magic later in the afternoon, and was glad they only had herpology and history of magic. He wondered whether it was his temper, which had always been short, or whether it was the full moon. He always had a lot of energy after a transformation, even before he knew he could do magic, and now his wand buzzed in his hand like the static in a TV aerial. He tried a quick Lumos, hiding in the toilet cubicle between lessons, and nearly burnt his retinas out. Perhaps the book Madame Pomfrey had mentioned might tell him more about it, but he'd never know now. There might be other books in the library, but he hadn't checked. He knew all the words well enough, and could spell it out if he concentrated hard, but he didn't dare. Remus lived in fear that if he wrote it down or said it out loud, then somehow everyone would find out his secret, and it was just better to keep stuff like that in your head. That's part 1. I will post part 2 hopefully before next Sunday. Have a great day, night, or whatever time it is. Bye-bye.